Most people think Leo is strong because Leo is confident. That's the story everyone repeats. But what almost no one talks about is why Leo had to become strong in the first place. In 2026, this question matters more than ever because behind the confidence, there is a mind that never truly rests. A mind that analyzes every interaction, every reaction, every silence. Leo doesn't just live in the moment. Leo remembers. Leo anticipates. Leo carries the emotional weight of rooms long after everyone else has moved on. This is why so many Leos feel misunderstood even when surrounded by people. Why being admired can feel strangely empty. Why walking away feels heavier than staying silent. This video is not here to praise Leo, and it's not here to criticize Leo. It's here to explain Leo psychologically. The decisions you've made that others questioned. The relationships that drained you more than they fulfilled you. The anger that appeared suddenly, but was actually building for years. The loyalty you gave without being asked, and the disappointment that followed. These were not random moments. They were patterns. In this video, we'll uncover 30 deep psychological facts about Leo in 2026, the kind that don't show up in casual conversations, the kind that only make sense once you've lived them. And if you're Leo, some of what you're about to hear may feel uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, but because it explains everything you've been trying to put into words. Stay until the end, because once you recognize these patterns, you can no longer unsee them. Fact 1. Leo is always aware, even when silent. One of the deepest psychological truths about Leo is this: Leo is almost never unaware. Even in moments when Leo appears relaxed, playful, or disengaged, the mind is quietly observing, tracking tone, noticing shifts in behavior, registering what is said and what is deliberately left unsaid. This is not suspicion. It is awareness. Leo does not simply experience life emotionally. Leo processes it psychologically. When someone enters Leo's space, Leo instinctively reads intention before words, energy before explanation, consistency before promises. This is why Leo often seems steps ahead of situations that surprise others. Not because Leo is controlling, but because Leo refuses to be blindsided twice. Psychologically, this constant awareness becomes both a strength and a burden. It allows Leo to protect themselves, anticipate outcomes, and lead with confidence. But it also means Leo rarely rests completely. There is always a quiet calculation running beneath the surface, a silent evaluation of trust, a subconscious question: is this safe for my heart? Over time, this awareness shapes Leo's life decisions. It explains why Leo withdraws without warning, why Leo senses change before it happens, why Leo may seem distant right before a major shift. The life lesson here is subtle but powerful. Awareness gives Leo strength, but peace comes only when Leo learns where vigilance is no longer needed. Not every situation requires armor. Not every silence is a threat. And not every moment must be carried alone. Comment if this resonates with you. And as we move into the next psychological truth, you'll begin to see how this constant awareness quietly shapes every other part of the Leo personality. Fact 2. Leo feels responsible for the emotional climate around them. After awareness, comes responsibility. One of the least discussed psychological traits of Leo is the unconscious sense of responsibility they carry for the emotional atmosphere around them. When Leo enters a room, they don't just observe what is happening, they feel compelled to stabilize it. If the mood is tense, Leo feels it. If people are uncertain, Leo notices it. If silence becomes uncomfortable, Leo instinctively fills it. This is not attention-seeking. It is emotional leadership. Psychologically, Leo internalizes the belief that someone must hold the center and that someone is often them. So Leo becomes the motivator, the protector, the one who keeps things moving forward even when they themselves are emotionally depleted. This is why Leo often appears strong, even during personal struggles. Why others lean on Leo without asking if Leo is still standing. Why Leo gives encouragement freely, but rarely asks for it in return. Over time, this emotional responsibility becomes heavy. Leo learns how to carry others, but not always how to be carried. The life lesson here is profound. Strength does not require constant performance. And leadership does not mean emotional self-erasure. When Leo learns that the world will not collapse if they step back, true balance begins. Comment if this feels like something you've lived, not just heard. And as we move forward, you'll see how this emotional responsibility quietly shapes Leo's most misunderstood reactions. Fact 3. Leo withdraws, not to punish, but to regain control. When Leo pulls away, most people misunderstand it. They assume it's pride, ego, punishment. But psychologically, Leo's withdrawal serves a different purpose. Leo withdraws to regain internal control. When emotions become overwhelming, when boundaries are crossed repeatedly, when respect feels uncertain, when words lose their meaning, Leo does not explode immediately. First, Leo retreats. This withdrawal is a recalibration, a silent regrouping, a moment where Leo reassesses what they are willing to tolerate and what they are no longer willing to explain. Because Leo does not withdraw lightly. By the time distance appears, the mind has already been exhausted from understanding, forgiving, and waiting. This is why Leo's silence often feels final. Not because Leo wants to hurt, but because Leo has already reached clarity. The psychological truth is this: Leo can endure a great deal. But once self-respect is threatened repeatedly, withdrawal becomes self-preservation. The life lesson here is not about cutting people off. It's about recognizing the moment when explanation turns into self-betrayal. Knowing when to step back is not weakness, it is mastery. Comment if you've ever reached this point quietly, because the next psychological fact reveals why Leo rarely returns once that line has been crossed. Fact 4. Leo's pride is a psychological boundary, not an ego display. Leo's pride is often misunderstood as arrogance. But psychologically, pride serves a very different function. For Leo, pride is a boundary. It is the internal line that says, this is how I must be treated. This is what I will not accept. This is where I stop explaining myself. Leo's pride does not come from feeling superior. It comes from knowing what it took to become strong. Behind that pride are past moments where Leo had to stand alone. Moments where Leo had to choose self-respect over approval. Moments where being humble would have meant accepting less than they deserved. This is why Leo reacts strongly to disrespect, even subtle disrespect, not because of ego, but because the mind registers it as a violation of hard-earned identity. Psychologically, Pride protects Leo from shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. Without it, Leo would give too much, tolerate too much, and lose themselves in the process. The life lesson here is essential. Healthy pride is not about dominance. It is about self-definition. When Leo honors their pride consciously, it becomes stability instead of rigidity. Comment if you've ever been misunderstood for protecting your self-respect, because the next psychological truth explains why Leo's need for recognition goes far deeper than most people realize. Fact 5. Leo seeks recognition because their identity is built on contribution. Leo does not crave recognition for validation alone. Psychologically, recognition confirms meaning. Leo's sense of identity is deeply tied to contribution, to giving, leading, creating, protecting, inspiring. When Leo pours energy into something or someone, it becomes personal. Effort equals identity. So when that effort goes unnoticed, Leo doesn't just feel ignored, they feel unseen. This is why Leo reacts strongly to lack of appreciation. Why silence hurts more than criticism. Why being taken for granted feels deeply destabilizing. Recognition reassures Leo that their presence matters, that their effort had impact, that their role was meaningful. Without this feedback, Leo begins to question not their worth, but their purpose. The life lesson here is transformative. Recognition should not be demanded, but it must be acknowledged. And Leo must learn that not everyone has the emotional capacity to reflect back the value Leo brings. Learning where to invest energy and where not to is one of Leo's most important psychological milestones. Comment if you've ever given deeply and felt quietly overlooked. In the next psychological fact, we'll explore why Leo's anger often appears suddenly, even though it has been building for a long time. Fact 6. Leo's anger is delayed, not impulsive. Leo's anger is often described as explosive, but psychologically, that description is incomplete. Leo's anger is not impulsive, it is delayed. Before anger appears, there is a long internal process. Observation, tolerance, rationalization, second chances that are never announced. Leo gives more time than people realize, more understanding than they admit, more silence than is healthy. Anger emerges only after Leo feels that respect has been repeatedly tested and ignored. By the time emotions surface, the decision has already been made internally. This is why Leo's anger feels sudden to others, but inevitable to Leo. Psychologically, anger is Leo's final boundary. It is not meant to destroy, but to stop the bleeding. The life lesson here is crucial. Anger is not failure, it is information. But Leo must learn to communicate limits earlier, before silence turns into fire. Comment if you've ever been told you overreacted even though you know you waited too long. Because the next psychological fact explains why Leo struggles deeply with being contradicted. Fact 7. Leo struggles with contradiction because identity is at stake. When Leo reacts strongly to being contradicted, it is rarely about being right. Psychologically, contradiction threatens identity. Leo builds their sense of self through lived experience, responsibility, and internal conviction. When someone challenges Leo abruptly or dismissively, it can feel like an attack on that inner structure. This is why tone matters more than words with Leo. Respectful disagreement can be welcomed. Dismissive contradiction cannot. Leo does not fear opposing views. Leo resists being invalidated. When contradiction lacks respect, the nervous system reacts defensively. Pride rises not to dominate, but to protect coherence. The life lesson here is nuanced. Strength does not require constant defense. True authority allows space for dialogue, but only where mutual respect exists. Learning the difference between challenge and disrespect is one of Leo's most important psychological refinements. Comment if you've ever felt misunderstood when standing your ground. In the next psychological truth, we'll uncover why Leo can appear social and powerful, yet still feel deeply alone. Fact 8. Leo's need for attention is a need to feel emotionally chosen. Leo's desire for attention is often misunderstood as vanity. But psychologically, attention represents something far deeper. For Leo, attention equals emotional choice. Leo does not want to be noticed by everyone. Leo wants to feel deliberately chosen, seen, valued, and prioritized by the people who matter. When Leo invests emotionally, they give fully. Presence, energy, protection, consistency. So when attention fades or becomes mechanical or feels obligatory, Leo does not feel unloved. Leo feels replaceable. This is why Leo reacts strongly to indifference. Why emotional distance cuts deeper than open conflict. Why being taken for granted feels like a quiet betrayal. The psychological truth is this: Leo's need for attention is a need for emotional confirmation that their presence still matters. The life lesson here is vital. Not everyone knows how to express appreciation clearly. Leo must learn to distinguish between lack of love and lack of emotional literacy, and to stop giving endlessly where recognition never returns. Comment if you've ever felt deeply present for others, but quietly absent in return, because the next psychological truth reveals why intimacy is both Leo's greatest strength and greatest vulnerability. Fact 9. Leo experiences intimacy as total emotional exposure. For Leo, intimacy is never casual. Psychologically, intimacy means exposure. When Leo opens their heart, they do not do it halfway. They bring loyalty, devotion, protection, and emotional intensity all at once. This is why Leo loves fiercely, but it is also why Leo is deeply affected by rejection, betrayal, or emotional withdrawal. Intimacy removes Leo's armor. And without that armor, every word carries weight. Every change in tone is felt immediately. Every silence becomes meaningful. This explains why a Leo may appear confident in public, but deeply sensitive in private. Why romantic wounds linger longer than expected. Why breakups affect Leo on a psychological level, not just an emotional one. The life lesson here is both painful and empowering. Depth requires discernment. Not everyone deserves access to Leo's inner world, and intimacy must be earned through consistency, not chemistry alone. Comment if you've ever loved deeply and paid a quiet emotional price. In the next psychological fact, we'll explore why Leo can appear fearless, yet still struggle with jealousy and emotional insecurity. Fact 10. Leo's jealousy comes from fear of emotional replacement, not possession. Leo's jealousy is often mistaken for control or dominance. Psychologically, it comes from something far more vulnerable: fear of replacement. Leo does not fear losing someone casually. Leo fears being emotionally replaced, forgotten, after having given loyalty, presence, and protection. Because when Leo commits, they commit fully. They don't divide their heart. They don't keep emotional backups. They don't love halfway. So, when Leo senses divided attention, secrecy, or emotional withdrawal, the mind reacts defensively, not to dominate, but to protect what was once exclusive and meaningful. This is why reassurance matters so deeply to Leo. Not empty words, but consistent behavior. Not promises, but presence. The life lesson here is critical. Jealousy is not weakness, it is unspoken fear. But Leo must learn that reassurance should be mutual, not begged for. And trust cannot survive where transparency is absent. Comment: if you've ever felt jealousy, not because you wanted control, but because you feared being replaced. Because the next psychological truth explains why Leo often tries to control situations emotionally, even when exhausted. Fact 11. Leo seeks control. When emotional stability feels threatened, Leo does not seek control by nature. Leo seeks stability. Psychologically, control becomes a response when Leo feels emotionally unsafe, uncertain, or disregarded. When outcomes feel unpredictable, Leo instinctively tries to anchor the situation through decisions, structure, or authority. This is why Leo often takes charge during chaos. Why Leo steps forward when others hesitate. Why Leo prefers clarity over ambiguity, even if clarity is difficult. Control gives Leo a sense of ground, something solid to stand on when emotions feel unstable. But here is the deeper truth. Over time, emotional control can become exhausting. Holding everything together leaves little space for vulnerability. And constantly being the strong one isolates Leo from receiving support. The life lesson here is transformative. Stability does not always come from control. Sometimes it comes from allowing uncertainty and trusting that not everything depends on Leo holding the center. Comment: if you've ever felt responsible for keeping everything from falling apart. In the next psychological facts, we'll explore why Leo can be admired, respected, and followed, yet still feel profoundly alone. Fact 12. Leo often feels alone because others lean on them more than they see them. Leo is rarely alone physically, but psychologically, Leo often feels alone. This happens because people lean on Leo for strength, direction, and reassurance, but rarely pause to ask what Leo needs in return. Over time, Leo becomes the one others depend on, the motivator, the protector, the emotional anchor, and slowly, Leo's own needs become invisible. People assume Leo is fine because Leo appears strong, because Leo doesn't complain easily, because Leo knows how to stand tall even when carrying emotional weight. This creates a quiet imbalance. Leo gives presence and stability, but receives admiration instead of understanding. The life lesson here is subtle but essential. Being reliable does not mean being invulnerable. Leo must learn that asking for support does not weaken authority, it humanizes it. Comment if you've ever felt surrounded by people, yet unsupported when it mattered most. Because the next psychological truth explains why Leo is almost always pushed into leadership, whether they want it or not. Fact 13. Leo becomes a leader because responsibility finds them first. Leo does not always seek leadership. Often, leadership finds Leo. Psychologically, people sense Leo's ability to hold pressure without collapsing, to make decisions when others hesitate, to stay composed when emotions run high. So, Leo is entrusted with responsibility sometimes without being asked. Others step back. Leo steps forward. This creates a pattern where Leo becomes accustomed to carrying weight early in life, And with that weight comes authority, confidence, and competence, but also expectation. Once Leo is seen as capable, they are rarely allowed to be uncertain. Once Leo proves strong, they are rarely offered rest. The life lesson here is profound. Leadership must be chosen consciously, not inherited unconsciously. Leo must decide which responsibilities are theirs and which were quietly placed on their shoulders without consent. Comment if leadership became your role long before you felt ready. In the next psychological facts, we'll explore how this constant responsibility shapes Leo's sense of identity and self-worth over time. Fact 14. Leo's self-worth is internally driven but externally tested. Leo's confidence appears natural and unshakable. But psychologically, Leo's self-worth lives in a delicate balance. Internally, Leo knows who they are. They carry a strong sense of identity, personal values, and inner standards. They are not easily influenced by trends or opinions. Yet externally, that self-worth is constantly tested. When Leo gives effort, loyalty, or leadership, and it is ignored, dismissed, or minimized, the mind does not collapse. It tightens. Leo does not question their value immediately. Instead, they question the environment. Am I in the wrong place? Am I investing in the wrong people? Is my energy being wasted here? This is why Leo can leave suddenly after long periods of patience. Self-worth does not erode loudly. It withdraws quietly. The life lesson here is grounding. Self-worth must be protected not only from disrespect, but from overexposure to places that cannot recognize value. Knowing when to leave is an act of self-respect, not pride. Comment if you've ever outgrown a place emotionally before leaving it physically. Because the next psychological truth reveals what happens when Leo's pride turns inward. Fact 15. Leo's shadow appears when pride becomes self-pressure. Leo's shadow does not appear as weakness. It appears as pressure. Pressure to always be strong, to always lead, to always hold composure, to never need too much. When pride turns inward, Leo becomes demanding of themselves in ways others never see. Mistakes feel heavier. Failures feel personal. Rest feels undeserved. This internal pressure can quietly turn into rigidity. Leo may become less forgiving, not of others, but of themselves. They raise the standard higher and higher, believing that excellence is the only way to remain respected. Psychologically, this is not arrogance. It is fear of falling from a position once earned. The life lesson here is liberating. True strength includes mercy toward oneself. Leo does not lose authority by resting. They regain clarity. Releasing self-pressure is not lowering standards. It is choosing sustainability over burnout. Comment if you've ever felt the weight of having to hold it together no matter what. In the next psychological facts, we'll explore how Leo evolves when self-awareness replaces self-pressure. Fact 16. Leo begins to heal when they stop performing strength. For much of life, Leo learns that strength earns safety. Confidence earns respect. Stability earns belonging. So Leo performs strength often flawlessly. But psychological healing begins the moment Leo realizes they no longer need to perform it. Maturity brings a quiet shift. Leo starts choosing authenticity over image, truth over control, presence over approval. This is when Leo allows themselves to feel tired without shame, to say no without explanation, to admit uncertainty without fearing loss of authority. Healing does not make Leo smaller. It makes Leo lighter. The life lesson here is profound. You do not lose power when you stop proving it. Real authority comes from self-trust, not constant demonstration. Comment if you've reached a stage where peace matters more than applause, because the next psychological truth reveals how Leo's relationships change once this shift begins. Fact 17. Leo's relationships improve when they stop overgiving. Leo loves through action, through loyalty, through presence and protection. But psychologically, Leo often gives more than is sustainable, believing that generosity will eventually create balance. Maturity teaches Leo a different truth. Overgiving does not create closeness. It creates imbalance. When Leo begins to give selectively instead of instinctively, relationships shift. Those who value Leo remain. Those who benefited without reciprocating fade. This is not loss. It is refinement. Leo learns that love does not require self-sacrifice to be real, and that consistency matters more than intensity. The life lesson here is liberating. You are not responsible for maintaining connections that drain you. Healthy relationships do not require exhaustion. Comment if you've ever loved deeply and later realized you were giving more than you received. In the next psychological facts, we'll explore how Leo's identity transforms when wisdom replaces reaction. Fact 18. Leo's true power emerges when emotion is regulated, not suppressed. Earlier in life, Leo often believes emotions must be controlled to remain strong. Anger is contained. Sadness is hidden. Vulnerability is postponed. But psychological maturity teaches Leo something far more powerful. Emotions do not weaken authority. Unprocessed emotions do. When Leo learns to regulate rather than suppress reactions, soften. Anger becomes clarity. Disappointment becomes discernment. Silence becomes intentional, not defensive. This shift changes everything. Leo no longer needs dramatic exits to feel respected. No longer needs emotional distance to regain control. No longer needs intensity to feel powerful. Inner authority replaces outer force. The life lesson here is subtle and transformative. Emotional mastery is not about feeling less. It's about understanding more. When Leo owns their emotional landscape, they become unshakable without becoming rigid. Comment if you've noticed yourself responding differently than you used to. Because the next psychological truth reveals how Leo's sense of identity evolves once this inner authority is established. Fact 19. Leo's identity stabilizes when they stop measuring themselves against expectations. For a long time, Leo measures themselves against expectations, their own and others. Am I doing enough? Am I leading well enough? Am I still respected? Am I still admired? Psychologically, these questions once drove growth, but eventually they create pressure. Maturity arrives when Leo realizes something essential. Identity is not maintained through constant comparison. When Leo releases the need to meet every expectation, something stabilizes internally. Decisions feel cleaner. Boundaries feel natural. Self-respect feels steady rather than reactive. Leo begins living from alignment instead of performance, from truth instead of approval. The life lesson here is grounding. You do not need to prove who you are to remain who you are. Once Leo internalizes this life, becomes less about maintaining position and more about living with purpose. Comment if you've stopped trying to be everything and started being yourself. In the next psychological facts, we'll move into Leo's final evolution, where purpose replaces pressure and wisdom becomes legacy. Fact 20. Leo finds purpose when strength is used to build, not to defend. Earlier in life, much of Leo's strength is used defensively, to protect boundaries, to assert self-worth, to survive emotionally. But with time, Leo begins to redirect that strength. Purpose emerges when Leo stops asking, "How do I protect myself?" and starts asking, "What am I meant to build?" Psychologically, this is a major transition. Strength is no longer reactive. It becomes intentional. Leo starts using influence to uplift rather than prove, to guide rather than dominate, to create stability for others without losing themselves. This is when leadership feels meaningful instead of heavy, when effort feels aligned instead of draining. The life lesson here is clarifying. Strength finds fulfillment when it serves something larger than ego or survival. When Leo builds from purpose, their presence becomes quietly powerful. Comment if you felt a shift from defending your place to defining your direction. Because the next psychological truth explains how Leo's story naturally turns into legacy. Fact 21. Leo thinks in terms of legacy, even when they don't say it out loud. Leo rarely lives only for the present moment. Psychologically, there is always a long view in the background. What will remain? What impact will this have? What will people remember? This is why Leo cares deeply about reputation integrity and influence. Not out of vanity, but because Leo wants their life to mean something. Decisions are filtered through consequence, actions through responsibility, words through permanence. As Leo matures, this legacy mindset becomes less about image and more about contribution. What values am I modeling? What strength am I passing on? What standard am I leaving behind? The life lesson here is timeless. Legacy is not built through grand gestures, but through consistent alignment between values and actions. When Leo lives with this awareness, life gains coherence. Nothing feels wasted. Comment if you've started thinking beyond immediate outcomes toward long-term meaning. In the next Psychological Facts, we'll explore how Leo ultimately finds peace, not by shining brighter, but by standing firmly in who they've become. Fact 22. Leo finds peace when approval is replaced by self-recognition. For much of life, Leo unconsciously seeks reflection. Not validation reflection, a sign that says, "I see you. I recognize your effort. I understand what you carry." But psychological peace arrives when Leo realizes something quietly profound. The most important recognition must come from within. When Leo learns to acknowledge their own growth, endurance, and integrity, the hunger for external approval softens. Praise becomes pleasant, not necessary. Admiration becomes appreciated, not demanded. This shift does not make Leo indifferent. It makes Leo grounded. Decisions are no longer shaped by how they will be perceived, but by whether they align with inner truth. The life lesson here is deeply liberating. You are not required to be witnessed to be whole. When Leo recognizes themselves fully, peace becomes stable instead of conditional. Comment if you've reached a point where your own approval matters more than applause. Because the next psychological truth explains how fulfillment replaces ambition when identity stabilizes. Fact 23. Leo feels fulfilled when identity and action finally align. Earlier in life, Leo often moves quickly, driven by ambition, expectation, and responsibility. But fulfillment arrives when action slows enough to match identity. Psychologically, Leo becomes satisfied not when doing more, but when doing what feels right. This alignment changes how Leo experiences success. It becomes quieter, less performative, more internal. Leo begins choosing depth over scale, meaning over momentum, quality over recognition. This is why mature Leo often appears calmer, less reactive, and more selective. Energy is no longer scattered, it is focused. The life lesson here is grounding and rare. Fulfillment is not found in expansion. It is found in congruence. When Leo's inner values and outer actions match, rest becomes possible. Comment if you've stopped chasing and started choosing. In the next psychological facts, we'll approach the final layer of Leo's evolution, where wisdom becomes quiet authority and peace becomes permanent. Fact 24. Leo gains emotional freedom when they accept what cannot be controlled. For a long time, Leo believes that effort can fix everything, that presence can stabilize any situation. That loyalty can eventually earn understanding. But emotional freedom arrives with acceptance. Psychologically, Leo matures when they recognize that not every outcome depends on their strength. Some people will misunderstand. Some connections will fade. Some doors will close without explanation. And none of this diminishes Leo's worth. Acceptance does not mean indifference. It means clarity. Leo stops exhausting themselves trying to control narratives, repair broken dynamics, or prove intentions to those unwilling to see them. This release is powerful. Energy returns. Peace expands. Life feels lighter. The life lesson here is quiet but profound. You do not need to manage everything to remain powerful. Freedom begins when Leo chooses where their influence truly belongs. Comment if you've stopped trying to fix what was never yours to carry. Because the next psychological truth reveals how Leo's authority becomes effortless once resistance fades. Fact 25. Leo's authority becomes quiet when self-acceptance is complete. In earlier stages, Leo's authority is visible, expressed through leadership, confidence, and presence. But psychological completion brings a different kind of power. Quiet authority. This is the authority that does not announce itself, that does not compete, that does not seek reaction. People feel it without being told. Leo reaches this stage when self-acceptance is complete strengths, acknowledged flaws, embraced past, integrated. There is no longer a need to defend identity or explain choices. Boundaries become natural. Decisions become simple. Leo no longer shines to be seen. Leo shines because it is natural to do so. The life lesson here is rare and final. True authority does not demand space, it creates it. When Leo accepts themselves fully, the world responds without resistance. Comment if you've noticed that peace now speaks louder than performance. In the final psychological facts, we'll explore how Leo completes the journey, not by becoming more, but by becoming whole. Fact 26. Leo becomes whole when strength and sensitivity no longer compete. For much of life, Leo feels torn between two inner forces: the need to be strong and the need to be real. Earlier strength often silenced sensitivity. Vulnerability felt risky. Emotion felt like exposure. But psychological wholeness arrives when Leo stops forcing a choice between the two. Maturity teaches Leo that sensitivity does not weaken strength, it humanizes it. At this stage, Leo can speak honestly without fear of losing authority, feel deeply without losing composure, care without overextending. There is no inner conflict anymore. Strength protects sensitivity. Sensitivity informs strength. The life lesson here is integrative and powerful. Wholeness is not about eliminating parts of yourself. It's about letting them work together. When Leo accepts every dimension of who they are, inner tension dissolves. Comment if you no longer feel the need to hide parts of yourself to stay respected. Because the next psychological truth reveals what happens once inner conflict fully ends. Fact 27. Leo stops reacting when inner conflict is resolved. Reaction is often born from inner disagreement. When part of the self feels threatened, unseen, or pressured. But when Leo becomes internally aligned, reactions soften. Psychologically, Leo no longer needs to defend identity, explain boundaries repeatedly, or assert presence forcefully. Decisions come from clarity, not emotion. Responses come from choice, not impulse. This does not make Leo passive. It makes Leo precise. Words are fewer. Silence is intentional. Energy is conserved. The life lesson here is subtle and liberating. Peace is not inactivity. It is resolution. When inner conflict ends, external chaos loses its power. Comment if you've noticed that things which once triggered you no longer do. In the next psychological facts, we'll approach the final layer where Leo's life begins to feel complete, meaningful, and internally finished. Fact 28. Leo finds meaning when past struggles finally make sense. For much of life, Leo endures intensity without immediate explanation. Early responsibility, emotional weight, situations that demanded strength before readiness. Psychologically, these experiences once felt unfair, heavy, unnecessary. But completion arrives when Leo looks back and sees the pattern. Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. Each challenge sharpened discernment. Each disappointment refined values. Each moment of isolation strengthened inner authority. Leo begins to understand that life was not testing them, it was shaping them. The life lesson here is deeply grounding. Meaning is often invisible while you are surviving. But once clarity arrives, even the hardest chapters become integrated rather than resented. Comment if you've reached a point where your past no longer hurts, it explains. Because the next psychological truth reveals how Leo knows when a cycle has fully closed. Fact 29. Leo feels inner closure when they no longer need validation from the past. Closure is not an apology. It is not recognition. It is not being understood. Psychologically, closure arrives when Leo no longer seeks confirmation from people, moments, or versions of themselves that no longer exist. There is no desire to revisit old arguments, no need to correct misunderstandings, no urge to prove growth. The emotional charge fades. Leo realizes they do not need the past to agree with them. They only need to be at peace with who they've become. This is when emotional weight lifts completely. Memory loses power. Energy returns to the present. The life lesson here is final and freeing. You do not need permission to move forward. When Leo releases the need for retroactive validation, life opens quietly and completely. Comment if you've stopped explaining yourself to the past. In the final psychological fact, we'll arrive at the core truth that ties everything together, the one that truly explains everything. Fact 30. Leo ultimately learns that they were never meant to be understood by everyone. This is the psychological truth that ties everything together. Leo spends much of life trying to be clear, clear in intention, clear in loyalty, clear in effort. Yet misunderstanding follows them. Psychologically, this is not a failure of communication. It is a mismatch of depth. Leo feels deeply, thinks long-term, and carries responsibility instinctively. Not everyone operates at that level. Not everyone can perceive what Leo carries silently. Completion arrives when Leo accepts this truth. They were never meant to be understood by everyone, only by those capable of meeting them at depth. This realization is liberating. Leo stops explaining themselves excessively, stops shrinking emotions for comfort, stops translating their inner world for those unwilling to enter it. Clarity replaces effort. Selectivity replaces exhaustion. The final life lesson is simple and profound. Understanding is not something you chase. It is something you recognize. When Leo lives from this truth, life becomes lighter, quieter, and deeply aligned. Comment if you've accepted that being deeply understood by a few is worth more than being admired by many. Conclusion. Closing the circle. If you've stayed until now, it's because something in this video spoke directly to you. Not to the version of Leo people see, but to the version that thinks, feels, and carries quietly. These 30 psychological truths were never meant to define you. They were meant to explain you, to show that your intensity had a reason, that your boundaries were learned, not imagined, that your strength was forged, not accidental. In 2026, Leo's journey is no longer about proving worth, earning attention, or holding everything together. It is about living from clarity, choosing depth, protecting peace, and allowing life to reflect back what you've already become. If this video made you feel seen, grounded, or understood in a way that words rarely do, stay with this channel. This space is for those who don't want surface answers, but real psychological understanding. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey, because understanding yourself changes how you live, and this is only the beginning.